So earlier today I recorded a couple videos that I took down because first I was interrupted by going over 10 minutes, and then I decided, okay, well, I'll just finish it, and then a visitor interrupted, and so I was looking at the stuff and trying to see what kind of editing you can do in YouTube. And that wouldn't help anyway, so I just deleted them, and this video is the content redone. I was just trying to describe, basically, a little bit of my methodology, give a little glimpse into my methodology about how I deal with this issue of every conversation potentially having a psychoanalytic component. Now, mostly I don't consider the psychoanalytic component too much, right? I just let it dribble on its own, sort of to see how big the reservoir of undealt with issues gets. And the reason is kind of funny, because really all of these conversations, everything is psychological, and the philosophy is embedded in the psychology, and you can't really separate them. But we can encode them without encoding too much about the philosophy, and then load them into another psychology, embed them in another psychology. So this creates this illusion of being able to just deal with the ideas as ideas. The psychologies involved are always much bigger than the ideas, but there's this way to subtract them out. So even though the major component to someone's participation in a conversation like this is psychological, you can still subtract that out and focus on the ideas, which is a good goal. Okay, so a situation where this starts to come up is when you get the kind of commenter who's dropping by and making comments, that are just critical. Oh, you look like a loser hippie man, or whatever. Now, often that's hit and run, you don't see them again. Maybe you reply to them like, well, what do you mean? Or, no, I'm not, or whatever you want to reply. You might find this person, this hit and run person, returning. There's an interesting phenomenon online where I would think anybody motivated to give their feedback, especially a negative personal judgment, which is sort of one of the harder things for most people to just take sitting down, that they would be eager to substantiate, right? And some people aren't so good at substantiation. Maybe the evidence they're going to give is, their grandma told them, or some anecdotal experience they've had. Maybe it won't be very transferable ideas. But when you ask for that, generally you can get at least a little bit. But sometimes you run into these people that are very, very coy about what they really believe. And this is a big warning sign that what you have is one of these inevitably psychological conversations. That's about psychology more than the topic apparently being discussed. So what I have been doing is mostly I'll have been letting them go their own way. I'll have been asking for clarification, trying to engage in sort of the soft sell. And then at some point I get fed up with that, or just decide that the time has come to move on to the next stage. At the next stage, what you do is you need some sort of a method to get information about somebody who is not directly sharing information with you, right? They will not answer, or cannot, your queries trying to get below the surface of their superficial judgments, right? But you can still find out a lot about where they stand. And the way you do this is you have to create a dilemma. Now, really, any statement someone makes is the kind of dilemma I'm talking about, but you can notch it up a little bit. Because every statement is a dilemma, because we like to think we've encoded a meaning in a sentence. Really, we encode a sentence. There's many possible interpretations. We often think the real one, the officially real one, is the one we meant to put in there. But we might be bad writers, so that might not be true. And even if we're great writers, what makes that the official one? It might be what everybody reading it's trying to figure out, or it might not be. It kind of depends on if they are just looking for ideas or want to know specifically something about you. So the dilemma is how to interpret a sentence. So if somebody gives you an answer to your question, to your query, you get two answers. One, the factual answer that tries to subtract out the psychology to some degree, and also an answer to the question of how will they interpret this sentence. So it's really good to construct sentences such that if they have multiple interpretations, which they always do, that you can tell which interpretation was taken by the answer. Because it's very hard, it's very difficult to communicate with people efficiently enough to describe the fact that you would like a specific answer on how they took the question as well as their answer to the question as they took it. Most people don't seem able or willing to recognize that kind of distinction. But you can still elicit it from them simply by putting them in a situation where they have to make the interpretation and making it such that the answer you get tells you which interpretation they took. You know, and games like this are part of good writing, right? A good novelist knows how to see a sentence that he's created as having multiple interpretation and using all of those interpretations in their proportions to construct the narrative that he wishes to construct. But I like in philosophy that we should specify which interpretation we're using, at least implicitly in the answer, if not explicitly. So what I do with these people who have been kind of rude, right? It's rude to come in and say, you're insensitive, you're this and you're that, and I'm going, wait, why do you think that this comment means that about me? And wait, I don't even believe this other thing. So what I do is I'm generally somewhat confrontational, and I call them on it. And maybe I start throwing out psychological analysis, which may be unsubstantiated by my higher standards, but which I believe I have a hint at and I need for this kind of interaction. And this creates a dilemma for them, where either they try to engage on this battle of witlessness, which is a combat that gets very uncomfortable for them, or sometimes at this point they're like, oh yeah, right, I don't want to really care about that bullshit. I really do want to talk about the topic. And I've had this happen a couple times, and it's great. What you want to talk about rare, that's pretty rare. Sometimes that is the case. I mean, my interpretation is that often people get hung up because when you go to talk to somebody, especially for the first time, you kind of unconsciously have to think, if not consciously, what the person's reaction is. And then you start reacting to their hypothetical reaction before you've even made your original statement. There's good reasons that people behave this way, but it also presents this complication. Okay. You know, it's like if you think somebody's going to, you're like thinking, hey, this guy's going to jump down my throat because I think what he said is total bullshit. Maybe you're going to try to say it in a nice way, but you're not sure you can. You do that and still get your criticism out. And then you start reacting to reactions that haven't even occurred yet. And sometimes when you challenge those people this way, you can clear the air of that. And they become comfortable just saying what they think, which is my goal. Other times, they create a series of cliches. Because when you get into this battle of wits with a witless person, they start to feel nervous. And it's like, hey, what are you talking to me for? I love the one where they criticize you for replying to them. Why do you care? Why? I know you're good. Why can't you stop talking to me? But, well, because you brought this in and I'm making a point. You know, they try. That's a reverse psychology tactic. I know you're going to reply again to this, but I've got to go to bed. Then you reply, and it turns out they didn't go to bed, and they reply again after all. And then they start going, whatever, or fuck you. And this tells me what I needed to know. You know, recently there was somebody who I ended up having this kind of an exchange with, and I forget what handle it was, but it was an exchange that went back and forth, and I was kind of finally like, okay, I was in that mood, I called them on it. And the way I did it was, I pointed out they knew nothing about science. And they were like, we haven't really talked about science, how could you know that? That just shows the kind of assumptions you'll make. Well, no, we hadn't talked about it. But I had presented dilemmas to these people with very easy scientific answers. You know, I will do that kind of thing. I will present a question that I know the answer to and see if you get the answer. And if I just want to know if you have basic science knowledge, it's easy. I can present questions